Well, welcome to the podcast, Janine. Thank you so much for joining. I guess in 30 to 60 seconds, how would you describe it is what you do?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'm in the financial education space, and my business predominantly focuses on educating women to build their wealth so that ultimately we can close the wealth gap. And I do this through a couple of different ways. I have online programming, I have a conference that I run annually, and I am an author and a speaker.
Great. And I guess what is the names of your businesses and book?
The name of the business is the Wealth Building Academy.
Okay, perfect. And your book is The Pink Tax, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We do like to kick things off with a little rapid fire questions,
Okay.
get things moving. So the first question is, what is your favorite movie or movie you've watched the most?
Oh, I don't. That's such a bad question for me because I don't rewatch movies. But actually, I've watched one movie twice. I watched Interstellar twice, and I thought that was a really good movie.
Okay.
But I don't know if I have a favorite movie per se.
Okay. Well, so Interstellar is up there.
Yeah.
What about a favorite book? You can say your own. That's fine.
I'm like, yeah, maybe my own, but I feel like as the author, you start to see over the years, like all the areas you could have like added things or changed things. I don't read books twice, so these are terrible questions for me. Okay. But I really enjoy memoir books. So the most recent book I read that I really liked was Jacinda Ardern's A Different Type of Power. I thought that was a really well-written book, and it was a really interesting story.
Great. Okay, that's a good one. I have not heard of that. Sorry, what was the author's name?
Jacinda Ardern. So she was the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she kind of came into power at a time when she definitely didn't think she was going to be. And then I guess New Zealand dealt with a ton of once-in-a-lifetime events. There was like a volcanic eruption, and then there was the mass shooting, and then there was COVID. All the while she I won't spoil too much of it, but she basically found out she was pregnant after years of infertility, kind of right as she came into the seat of the prime minister.
Okay, great. I really exposed that. Like, I have no clue international politics there. Like, who's that? Okay, that's good. That sounds like a good book. What about a podcast? Do you have a favorite podcast? Again, you can say your own, but
yeah, hopefully it's mine. But I listen to a lot of you can tell I listen to and read and watch a lot of like nonfiction stuff, but I listen to Front Burner, the CBC podcast, pretty religiously almost every day. I really like the kind of short geopolitical takes on what's going on in the world.
Okay. Yes, you seem like very on top of politics, everything that's going on. So it's something I could get a little influence from that. So it's good. Movies, I have lots of movies, but not this good stuff. When you have to lock in for work, do you have like a process or something you do, like music or like a certain space?
Yeah, I definitely will like turn my phone on Do Not Disturb. And then I usually text my husband because if my phone's going on Do Not Disturb, our daycare obviously can't get through. So I feel like as a working parent, there's like another level of complexity. So one of us has to be able to be having our phone available to get through.
Okay.
Should,
coordinate your Do Not Disturb.
Yeah, exactly. And then I would say I did this all through university as well, but I listen to classical music when I'm like in the zone. I was a ballet dancer growing up, and there's just like something about classical music where I can just like focus and go for hours.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so classical music, Do Not Disturb. What about when you have to like lock out? Because you got a lot going on. So it's like I gotta stop working. Like, do you have like a hobby or something you want to do, or like a way to be like, getting out of your head?
Yeah, I think it's hard as an entrepreneur because especially being on social media, like it literally never ends. But daycare pickup happens. So that usually is kind of a hard boundary to stop working. And then I would say like during the workday, if I need to take a break, I'll either go for a walk again without my phone. So have to do a little bit of coordinating there. Or I've recently started playing, probably in the last year and a half, tennis. And I find tennis is a really good sport where you can't think about anything else, because otherwise you're going to miss the shot or hit it the wrong way. And so I can't be in my head when I'm playing tennis. And I find that's a really good way to kind of get out of focusing or thinking about other things in my life.
Yes, tennis is a good answer. If you received a $20,000 grant today, what would you use it for?
Oh, probably like marketing and advertising dollars, because I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges with being kind of perpetually online, is creating content and getting that in front of the right eyes, because the algorithm is incredibly challenging right now in 2026.
Yes. Okay. And very last question. If you could travel anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Ooh, that I probably would say to the Maldives. I've been wanting to go there forever. It's a very long flight, and I definitely would want to go probably in business class since it is so long. So I feel like if I had unlimited budget, that's where I would go.
Yeah. Well, you could use the $20,000 grant for the business
Okay, I
class.
didn't know that it had to be for
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. This
for
isn't.
anything
There's
else.
not like strict rules for this grant. It's like whatever you want to spend it on. Okay, so Maldives and business class. That's a good answer. Okay, so that's rapid fire. So now we can actually get into the serious stuff. So as you touched on, you've got a lot of different business initiatives going on, but I understand that you were a corporate accountant for a number of years. You worked in the corporate world. So was there a moment that you can think of that it really dawned on you that like I want to start a business for myself and work for myself? Like, can you point to any specific time, or was that always something you just felt internally? Yeah, just any info on that would be great.
Yeah, it's funny because when I look back at like university days, and I was doing my accounting degree, and then I think ultimately started doing my CPA designation post graduation. At one point, I thought I was going to be a partner at an accounting firm, which is kind of laughable now. But
Yeah,
I think it's so hard to see kind of there. I think there's a Steve Jobs quote that's like, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And it's so hard to see what's actually happening. But I think throughout my like childhood, I always, had a lemonade stand, or I was trying to sell crab apples to my neighbors, or, always trying to find ways to make money. And then kind of throughout high school and university, I always had multiple side hustles. And so I think that kind of was very entrepreneurial, even though no one really told me that. And
yeah,
then I think, I was a tax specialist at one of the big four firms, ended up leaving into the tech space, which was great. And I learned a ton there. But I think there was always, like, I was always doing this work off the side of my desk. And then I think really when the pandemic hit and I started writing my book and started actually looking at, like, if I was to build this business, what would it look like? I think that is kind of the time period where I was like, okay, maybe I could make a go of this. And so that's kind of when I started to stop looking at it as something I was just kind of doing for extra income off the side of my desk, and started to look at it as maybe a more full-time thing.
and was there anyone in your life that had kind of like done this before you that kind of gave you the inspiration, or do you think you were just kind of like always drawn to like creating and doing stuff outside of like your typical job?
Yeah, I think like when I look at the spheres of people I was around at the firms and in the corporate space, not really. But I think because we have such a cool way to connect with people online, I was able to surround myself with people that had built businesses before, and were, business coaches, or were running masterminds in small groups. And so I was able to join a few of those kind of while I was still in the corporate space, to see kind of how other people were doing it and how they were structuring their business and how they were and what things they were doing to be successful. And I think that definitely gave me some inspiration, and was also a great support for me to kind of ask questions too, because it is scary leaving corporate.
And how did you like land on the idea of like wealth education being the industry that you wanted to go into, or wealth management? Because you said you had a bunch of different side hustles. Like, what was it about this specific idea that made you want to do it, and then also that you felt confident that this idea could be the one that could allow you to like do this full time?
Yeah, I think when I look back at, you know, even through my university days, I had a blog back then and was writing about money and writing about how I was navigating the financial landscape. And I really felt that this wasn't something that was being taught to us. And I have an accounting degree. And while I, finished my designation at one of the big four firms and I audited some of the biggest companies in Canada, nobody was teaching us about financial education. I can still like distinctly remember talking to a senior manager who had like, at the time, I think his TFSA maxed out at like 50 grand and it was all sitting in cash. And I was like, these are the people, like we're supposed to be good at money. We're CPAs. And so I think that kind of made me believe that obviously this was a gap in the market. Financial education is not really taught. In terms of how I guess I knew that this was like the right thing for me, I think because I had always been so interested in it and I could go down kind of a rabbit hole of building out a spreadsheet to calculate different things and was very passionate about it. I think that's really what continued to motivate me towards building this business.
Yeah. And is there something like when you decided that this was the area you're going to go, did you test the idea? Did you get like feedback? Did you talk to, like you said, you're in the corporate world, there's lots of people making a lot of money. Did you get
Yeah.
their thoughts on it? Like, was there, I guess, in terms of like, everyone can have a hypothesis, but then you got to test it. Was there anything you did, or you just felt confidence and you went for it?
Well, so I had been doing this work. I've been in the financial education space for 14 years now. So I started writing as a way to earn additional income. So when I was in university and when I was starting my articling journey, I was writing for financial institutions like blog posts. And at that, being paid a couple $100s for an article. So I had kind of been doing this work for a long time and, slowly started to build different programs. And launched most of those programs before I left the corporate world. So I knew that there was demand for those things, and I knew that people were interested in them. I don't think I asked anybody in corporate if they thought it was a good idea, because I feel like most people in corporate are very like, we like corporate, we want to stay and earn money. And there is that fear piece between leaving corporate and taking the jump into entrepreneurship. I think again, being part of some of those groups of women that were kind of female run and owned businesses, being able to ask them questions about whether or not they thought X, Y, and Z was a good idea, or how this specific thing landed when I was marketing it this way. I think that was really helpful in getting my business off the ground. But yeah, I think a lot of testing, a lot of tweaking. And I was fortunate enough that I was able to do some of it while I was still in the corporate space.
And for the testing and the tweaking, because that's really interesting, and that's feedback we've gotten from a lot of people that we've interviewed, is like you have to test the idea before you invest a lot of money into like branding and things like that. So was there a formal process that you, I guess, underwent for like the testing and tweaking, or was that just something you like were naturally trying new things and like you would just see an uptick in, I guess, in your case, like views or on your articles and things like that? Was this something you were actively trying to do, or you just kind of naturally were always tweaking things?
Yeah, I think always testing and changing. I'm kind of an advocate of sometimes even selling something before you have it fully fleshed out. And then oftentimes, if it's like a program, working with the people that are interested in taking it to kind of tweak it towards what they find interesting or valuable. So when I run some of my mastermind groups, sometimes I'll have a group that is more entrepreneurial. And in that case, we might tweak what we are learning to be geared a little bit more towards that. Or I might have some groups that are more focused on corporate. And so again, we kind of test and change around those different groups of people. I've also had feedback that I've run like a 6-month program and we kind of got to the end of it and I feel like people wanted to keep going. So I was like, hey, do you want to extend for 4 more months? And they were like, yep, absolutely. And so we were able to just kind of pivot really quickly and add different things in based on, again, what people are interested in.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so it sounds like you started by writing articles from financial institutions. You said you were getting paid a few $100 for that. And then you obviously went into doing things like mastermind groups. So how did you first get customers for like a mastermind group? Do you remember the process of how you got started with that?
Yeah, I think most of my marketing is done on social media. So
Yeah,
Instagram is a big one, LinkedIn, my newsletter list. So it was really just kind of over the years building up an audience. And because I had been doing this for a while, I have it's a pretty small audience, but a pretty engaged audience on some of those platforms. And so when I was, starting to build out these programs, I would be like, who is interested in this? And I think to your point of like testing and changing, I will always like open the question box or ask for feedback on some of these social media platforms. And people are usually quite willing to give you that information.
yeah.
And then just kind of building that relationship with people so that when I launched kind of the first cohort of whether it was a course or a mastermind, there was people who were interested, or I had people on a wait list that I could reach out to.
Okay, so it was basically like, to put it roughly, it was like you had a network that you would build
Yeah.
through your writing, and then from there you were able to kind of convert that into sales.
Yeah, I think over the years I started writing, and then kind of as I guess grew in the side hustle space, it started to become different speaking engagements. I guess predominantly in Calgary where I live, but that continued to build my online audience, and I would connect with people. I ran an event with the U of A
Swing hard in case you hit
10
it.
years ago, and people will still be like, oh, I connected with you back then, or I followed you from back then, and I've stayed and watched your journey. So it's always interesting seeing where people come from. But I think, yeah, over the years, just building that network and having people kind of follow my story and what I've done with, I guess, my life and my business and how I can help them.
No, that's so cool. I'm gonna hop in here as well. So I know you had kind of mentioned that it was started since your university days. You're in the corporate world, bit of a side, like doing it as a side hustle, but it was during the pandemic where you really started kind of thinking, can this be a full-time thing, not a side hustle? So at that point, when you were kind of on the precipice of that decision, like, was that something you felt confident doing? Was it something you kind of almost had to like force yourself to do and leave the corporate safety net? What was that kind of transition like?
Yeah, I think it's hard looking back because I was like, what was I thinking? So the pandemic hit. I found out I was pregnant 4 days into lockdown. And then I decided to start writing my book at 8 months pregnant. So I don't know what was going through my mind during those months, but apparently that's kind of what kicked it all off. And then I remember being like 6 months postpartum, and I was doing like a writing retreat by myself at a hotel in Calgary, and my husband would bring our son to the hotel so I could feed him and then like leave so I could write. And then I did a TED talk at that time too. So I look back and I'm like, what was I thinking? And then I think like coming back to corporate, what I think I really found was I was working corporate, trying to build a business, writing a book. Shortly thereafter, I started a master's program because apparently didn't have enough to do. I was sitting on a couple of boards, and I was trying to be a present parent. And it wasn't working in the sense of I was so exhausted at the end of the day. I wasn't showing up as like the parent I wanted to show up as when my son came home from daycare. So I knew something had to give. And I really kind of sat with like, okay, what is the thing I enjoy least out of all of these things? And that was the corporate space. And even though that one came with the highest paycheck, I figured, well, I mean, I'm always going to have my CPA designation. And so if this doesn't work, then I can fall back on that. And I'm sure someone would hire me to do accounting if they really needed to. And so I figured, well, I'm going to give this a go. And I think about a year after being back from mat leave, I just knew that it was time to kind of say goodbye to corporate. My book was, I guess, a couple of months away from launch at that point. So it was really, really busy. And that's kind of just when I made the decision to do it. And it was scary. But again, I was, I think, part of a group of women at that point that were cheering me on. They were excited for me. And so having that community of other entrepreneurs was really important at that time as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, like you said, you just had a little on your plate, just a little,
Yeah, like just 1 or 12 things,
just 1 or 2 things.
And you mentioned a writing retreat. I'm just curious, is that you just booked the hotel room? It just
yeah, that I just needed a different space. I think, especially during the pandemic, and I think anyone who's a parent realizes how chaotic your house gets. Like, I feel like my son is 5 now, so it's a little bit better. But back then when he was like 1, everything gets like pulled out and put absolutely everywhere. And so when I would sit down to write, even if he was at daycare, or I guess he wasn't at daycare at 6 months, but I would be like, oh, I should clean this, or I should, put this away, or whatever it ended up being. And so I just needed a space that was like clean, organized. There was no baby toys anywhere. And so I booked a hotel not far from where we live, and just like went and wrote. I think I wrote 10,000 words in that weekend. And yeah, my husband would just pop in for, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then he would take the baby home and put him down.
That's sweet. It's like a lock-in retreat.
Yeah, pretty much. I definitely recommend it to people, because I think just having that dedicated space and focus is something, especially with how many, I think, different social media apps are pulling our attention every which way. It can be something that is really great. And it doesn't necessarily have to be writing a book. It could be like a retreat for planning the year for your business, or a social media calendar, or whatever it is that you're working on, if you really need to lock in. And I think sometimes if you do it during the middle of the week too, you can find a pretty good deal on a hotel in your city.
Yeah. I still don't. I'd have to make sure I don't book like a nice hotel, because I could see myself doing this and then just like going to the pool and hanging out on the water side or something.
I think Brene Brown talks about this as well, where her husband like takes the kids and leaves for 3 days so that she can kind of do her writing. And I think she talks about it. I can't remember if it was a podcast, where sometimes she doesn't end up doing anything for those 3 days. She just like decompresses. And then when he comes back, she's like ready to write. And so even though there is the chaos of life, she's able to focus. So I think sometimes also just taking yourself out of the chaos that is life and work, and being able to just like actually wind down for 24 or 48 hours isn't a bad thing either. And I'm a big fan of hot tubs, and I definitely went down and sat at the bar and had a glass of wine. And I think that's all part of it too.
Yeah. Okay, well now I feel better about it. I inevitably do nothing for 4 days, but yes, no, that's very cool. One thing I'm curious about, and it sounds like your journey to building your business was kind of, I guess, really influenced by your writing and being online. But how do you think like the digital footprint comes into play with entrepreneurship? Because I see people being like, you got to have a digital footprint, you got to be online, that's a good way to network. But then I think for a lot of people, it is like pretty time consuming, and B, I think it can like get away from you pretty quick, where now you're just like all this, like it's like a full-time job. You're just kind of like interacting with people and maybe not working on your business. But how did that kind of influence things, and what would be your take on it? Like, do you think that's something that entrepreneurs like need to have, and it increases the odds of success?
I think it probably depends on your business. I would say probably if you're a service-based business that's not like super Googleable, then probably. So like when I say super Googleable, I mean like if I'm looking for a physiotherapist, I'm going to go Calgary physiotherapist near me. And that's probably the physio I'm going to choose, or I'm going to ask a friend and they're going to give me a recommendation. But for something like me, where I'm in the financial education space, it's unlikely that someone's going to Google like financial educator near me. So I think that's where the social media presence becomes more important. I think if you have a brick and mortar store, maybe you need to be online less so, but I don't think it hurts to kind of build that online presence. I would say also from a service-based business perspective, if you Google me, you see all of my credentials, you see that I'm an author, you can see all the news articles I've been quoted in. And I think that also builds a level of trust with people. So I think if you're, going to be giving people advice or coaching them through things, that can be really helpful to have that digital footprint. It doesn't always have to look like a huge social media following. But I think that doesn't hurt per se.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. And So I think it's, it's starting to make sense when you're talking about how, like, your path to becoming an entrepreneur. It sounds like you were always kind of drawn to it. You always had stuff going on, when you were in university, you had side hustles, and then you were drawn to financial education, but just within the space of, financial education or financial planning or whatever. Like, how is it that you narrowed in on your business model? Because there would be like a million different ways that you could have gone with it. Like, you could have just become, a financial advisor at like a big bank or something like that.
Mhm.
But you chose the space of education where you wrote a book and you run these mastermind groups. Was that something that you had to do any research or analysis to figure out, like, okay, this is like an untapped market within, the financial space? Just curious as to how you sort of formulated the business model.
Yeah, and I think the business model is always changing too. So I've tried lots of different things, like running small masterminds or running a master class. I've built a course before and kind of seen what people like. I feel like what worked a few years ago doesn't necessarily work today in terms of like what people are looking for. Most people want like connection, in-person events. So I think, the business always has to be testing and changing depending on what's going on in the landscape. But overall, I think you kind of hopefully are listening to what your customers are asking for. And whether that's like an Instagram question box or a survey that you send out in a newsletter, or you're asking past clients, I think all of those things can kind of dictate how you actually build your business and what it looks like.
Gotcha. And then, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of like, you're getting feedback from your customers that's sort of helping you. And I guess in that first year, so it sounds like you launched your book while you were still in the corporate world, correct? And then, you made the decision to leave the corporate world. What did your life kind of shift to once you left the corporate job? Because now all of a sudden, you're probably freeing up 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So did that allow you to really focus in on one area that perhaps you weren't able to dedicate the time to? I guess what sort of shifted in your business at that point?
Obviously, like more time to be able to focus on it.
Yeah.
And there was less, especially when I was in my last corporate job, there would be like pushes towards like big presentations. So like in the days leading up to that, basically that's all I'd be working on. So there was no real time for things for my business. And so kind of you tend to let things obviously fall to the wayside when you're focused on your corporate job. I would say it's interesting because I think when we are super busy and we have a lot of deadlines, for some reason, I think we just make things work. And so when you have more time to do things, I don't know if we get more done. Sometimes I think there's more room for rest, and I don't think that's a bad thing either. But I would say like I'm able to be more intentional with, how I'm spending my time during the day. I used to use almost all my vacation days for working on my business. Like if I wanted to go to a conference that wasn't related to my corporate job, I would take vacation days and basically go to like work on my business. And so now I kind of just have the flexibility to do that as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question too, because your business, as you've said, is that there's lots of different avenues to market yourself, and that sort of builds the credibility, especially in a space like, financial education. How do you balance, I guess, spreading yourself too thin? Like, is there things where you've tried and you're like, this is not working, and like now I'm not able to focus on this one thing that really was driving, the business? So do you have like a formal process with that? Like, do you tweak that? Do you reflect on that? Or is it just like you kind of go take it on? So I'm getting the sense that you just like do everything.
I will
So
let you know when I figure that out.
yeah,
But at the same time, I do look back, like as a good accountant, I go and look back at kind of revenue breakdown by different category at the end of the year. So I see like where I earned the most from and kind of what areas were profitable versus like if there was one that wasn't profitable. And I think I'm a big advocate, especially when I do work sometimes with entrepreneurs. If there is like a segment of your business that's not profitable, you either need to figure out pretty quickly how to make it profitable. And sometimes that can look like getting funding, or you need to pivot that section of your business and either get rid of it or change it so that it does become something that can be profitable.
And is that like an annual review that you do just yourself, like, or is that something you're just constantly tracking, or how does that look?
Yeah, ideally I would be doing it probably once a quarter, but I usually end up waiting until the end of the year to do it, because it just doesn't sometimes feel like a priority. But I think if you're a really good accountant, you would be doing it once a quarter and kind of looking at the ins and outs of your financials on your business as the months are happening. But that's not always the case, sometimes in entrepreneurship.
Yes. Okay. No, that makes sense. I think that's like, if you want to improve the profitability of a business, probably the surest way to do that is to figure out a way to like reduce costs and really look at the different, I guess, business lines you have. But I feel like a lot of times entrepreneurs, they're kind of, the personality is like go, go, go. And it's like, well, I'll just make more money rather than, actually evaluate where I'm spending money. So I think that's like a really good point, that having, at least an annual review of looking at the different business lines and be like, okay, what is making money? What isn't? And then, maybe making some tough decisions at that point of like, okay, what do I need to do to actually increase profitability?
Yeah, and I think, I say this to people in their personal lives, but I think it applies to business too. Somehow we all end up getting like subscribed to 8 billion subscriptions every single year. And so even taking a look at like what you're subscribed to from a business perspective, because there's a software for everything, and seeing if you still need it, it still serves your business, it's making you money, or if there's like a downgrade tier that you can drop down to for a little bit so that you can run more of a lean business. I think sometimes, especially as entrepreneurs, we're marketed all of these tools that are going to save us all this time and all this money, but it can add up really quickly over the course of a year. And if you aren't paying attention, I think sometimes those things are on auto renew. And again, maybe you're not using them, and then you're paying, sometimes thousands of dollars for software that you're not actually using.
Yeah, I think I'm like scared to actually look at my personal subscriptions and like I think. So I still have a Good Life membership. I haven't been to Good Life in a very long time, but the worst one is probably Masterclass. I don't know, that business where it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I don't think I've watched any videos, and it's like it's a lot of money per year. So maybe this will be like, the inspiration to actually audit myself.
And I think, it doesn't have to be, I tell people this all the time, whether it's their business or their personal, it doesn't have to be like goodbye forever. It can just be like goodbye for right now. Or you never know, sometimes when you're canceling a subscription, I tried this with the New York Times, and they'll give you a really low rate for like 6 months. And then what I kind of tell myself is, okay, I'll take that low rate for 6 months. And then I put something in my calendar to remind me to kind of reassess and figure out whether or not I want to continue paying that amount, or if my money can be put towards other things in my life or my business that are going to drive more value.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just had this vision of myself like at Good Life watching a master class. Like I'm just like getting smarter and stronger.
Yeah.
But it hasn't happened yet. One day. So it sounds like you are very active in your marketing, which you said comes through both social media. You do in-person events. Has there been something that you have done that you have noticed, like, oh, this like really increased the growth of the business and made me more visible? Or is it just like you're doing everything and like it just kind of slowly builds and builds and builds?
Yeah, I really, unfortunately, think it's just like a grind over a long period of time. Um, when you talk to many successful entrepreneurs, they'll say, like, I was an overnight success 10 years in the making. And so I've really only been doing this full time for a couple of years now, and really been dedicated to it for a couple of years. So I feel like I have a long way to go. And I think being someone who is very impatient, it can be hard to, it's not like you have a viral TikTok, and I've gone viral on a few different platforms, but I would say that doesn't always drive business or drive sales to your organization, especially if you're not a product-based business. But yeah, it's not, unfortunately, it's not like, oh, you went viral on TikTok and now you make $1 million. That unfortunately is not the case right now on the internet.
Yes. Yes. I always get confused too when you see like a business that just started and they have like immediately like 50,000 Instagram followers. Like
I think a lot of those are bought.
Yeah, because it never really makes sense to me. Because it's like if you were like a celebrity, it's like, yeah, I guess I get that.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there'll be just like this random business that sells like extension cords or something. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, 8,000 Instagram followers.
I would say though, thinking about the title of my book, The Pink Tax, I think that has actually driven a decent amount of probably speaking engagements, because when people are searching that term, and I did not think this through when we named the book, I almost didn't name it The Pink Tax. But I think when I'm maybe one of the first few things that comes up, or when you kind of flip to images and you see this book called The Pink Tax, that starts to, I think, get people interested in, oh, what is this book? Who is this woman? And I've had a few people reach out from a speaking engagement perspective, being like, hey, I was Googling about the pink tax and your book came up. So I think sometimes having good SEO can help. I would say that's probably one of the things I think that has continued to drive that, I guess, line of revenue in my business.
Yeah, I feel like we could have a full episode on authoring a book, but
Yes.
I guess, yeah, like what made you decide that you wanted to write a book?
I don't know. I get these ideas in my head that I'm just going to do something and then I end up doing them. But I think I always knew I had a book in me, and I had been writing a personal finance blog for years. And it was in the pandemic, and I was doing a bit of speaker training at that point. And one of the women that was helping with some of our script development ran, she calls them writing sprints. And they were all online at this point because it was the pandemic. But it was basically like you log in and you're online for 8 hours, and you do these like hour sprints, and then you come back to the group and talk about kind of what you wrote, what hurdles you came up with. And at that point, I had brought up in the chat, like, I don't know if this is one book or two books. I really felt like in the personal finance space, there was a lot of books that were like, here's exactly how to build wealth. But there was no books being like, here's actually the systemic challenges that women are facing when it comes to building their wealth. And so I kind of asked the group this question, and the woman who was leading it was like, no, it's absolutely one book. And you would kind of be not first to market, but one of the only people talking about kind of the intersectionality of building wealth and the personal finance side of things, and also the systemic challenges that people are facing. And then, I think this helped my confidence, but she was like, who would pre-order this book? And like 10 people said like, oh, I would read that, or I would pre-order it. And it kind of gave me the confidence to start actually deciding I was going to write this book. And I was 8 months pregnant, which I also don't recommend, but I just started doing it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That is interesting too, that, you were signed up for this course. It sounds like it was online, and that kind of like, helped initiate the process. Because I know for me personally, whenever there's like someone I've tried to do an online course, even if it's like not like, the most amazing instructor or highest quality, just like that external accountability of just like being in a room or even a virtual room with people, it just, I don't know, it's so easy to just like push things off and not do them, but like just like a weekly group helps so much.
Yeah, I think Cal Newport talks about like deep work, and there's I think a term, a lot of people with ADHD use it, but I think it's also, I've seen it happen in women's entrepreneurship groups as well, where you just kind of go into a Zoom room and you're all just like working. One person's playing music, you come back, have a break and chat. And I think sometimes that is a really great way to, again, to your point, have that accountability of like, okay, this is what I'm going to get done. You say, I'm going to do these 3 things in this session. And you just check in with each other. And I think having other people around you to kind of hold you accountable, but also cheer you on as you're trying to accomplish some of those things.
Yeah, well, I think that's also one of the things we hear about with entrepreneurship too, is it like, there's so many pros to it, like you said, the flexibility, all that, but it can also be a bit lonely too.
Oh, it's so lonely.
Like, a bit isolating. So it's like searching out those groups that it's like from a productivity standpoint is great, but then also from like just even a personal standpoint of like having those people cheer you on, or like that you're not just sitting in a room by yourself all day kind of thing.
And sometimes you are sitting in a room by yourself all day. And I think also knowing when you need to like either go for a walk or go to the coffee shop or go and talk to someone, especially if you're like me and you're an extrovert. I think that can also be really important. And so having those working sessions weekly or, bi-weekly, I think can be a great way to make sure that you're not feeling too isolated, because as an entrepreneur, I think we're all going through the same things, and we're all, fighting the algorithm or trying to get sales to increase. And so hearing kind of what other people are doing and that they're also in the same boat as you, I think is really important.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you found like a course or a group? Because you mentioned you had like other female entrepreneurs that you were like talking to when you launched your business. And was that just something where like by happenstance there's people you met, or was this like actively a group that you joined to have like a formal, I don't know, peer group of entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I've done both. So I've done like a group of women that just kind of came together and we would check in with each other because we all kind of knew each other, or it's like this person knows this entrepreneur and they brought that. And then I've also done paid groups. I would say probably with the paid groups, though, you're more likely to show up, have done the homework. You want to make sure that you're actually engaging because you're paying to be there. And so I think it's, the same thing as when people host free events. Like half the people don't show up because they're like, I don't really feel like it. Oh, it snowed. Oh, it's cold out. Oh, my kid doesn't want me to leave. Whereas if you charge for something, people have kind of skin in the game and want to make sure that they're getting their money's worth.
Yeah. And would there be any group that you paid for that you would recommend?
I don't know if there's a specific one. I've been a part of lots of different ones. I would say there's tons of business coaches out there. So I think finding one that is that you connect with the person leading it is really important. And then I think also talking to clients that they've had and that have been through those groups to make sure they're kind of valuable for you and that you're going to get out what you put into it. But yeah, I wouldn't say that there's one specific one. I've been a part of, I think, 3 or 4 different ones, and they've all been really great.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I do think, and again, this podcast is kind of about, hopefully inspiring some people to start something that they've been thinking about. But I think a lot of people are working, a corporate job. So, it's not so urgent because like you have someone paying your bills, and B, like when you do have someone paying your bills, anytime that corporate job gets busy, the thing that gets pushed is like this thing you're trying to start. And oftentimes there's not really any external accountability. It's very easy just to push it off. So I know I found personally, like that's something I've been thinking about, was like some sort of group or something like that, that kind of just puts even like a small amount of structure in place that kind of, keeps things on the tracks a little bit.
Yeah. And there, I would say like to anyone looking, there are groups for all different types of entrepreneurs. I think that's the other thing, is you kind of want to be in a group where your businesses are similar. So like, if you have a product-based business and you're in a group with people that are service-based business owners, the advice and the challenges are going to be very different. But I would also say like many cities will have like young entrepreneurs groups, or I can't remember what it stands for. I think it's called YPO, women. It's like a women's entrepreneur group. Yeah. But if you literally just Google in your city, oftentimes I think there's lots of groups available. I think like in Calgary, we have like the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, and I think they have resources for entrepreneurs as well. So really just seeing what's available, and also kind of where you fit in, because again, running different types of businesses, there's obviously going to be different types of challenges, and finding kind of the people that you connect with.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice.
I'm hopping in here as well. I'm loving this conversation. It's so interesting. I think for any entrepreneur, it is, you're putting yourself out there. But I think especially from all the things that you've been talking about, like the writing, the speaking, the book, the stuff, like you're really having to put yourself out there, and that takes a lot of confidence. Do you feel like, I know you said you're an extrovert, do you feel like that comes naturally for you, or was that something you had to like work on, having that kind of confidence to, go and do a TED Talk and all that?
I think I've always enjoyed I was a dancer growing up, so I've always enjoyed being on stages, and I've always liked public speaking. I still think though that like there is a bit of imposter syndrome no matter what level you're at. And I think that it's sometimes hard to get out of your head. I think it comes with practice. It comes with reps. And I think, especially as an entrepreneur, one of the pieces of advice I got years ago was anytime someone, and I think this applies to corporate too, but anytime someone gives you positive feedback. So I took one of your courses, Janine, and I loved it. Or, I listened to your speech and it inspired XYZ. You got to screenshot that and put it in what we call a hype folder. So that can be on your desktop, that can be on your phone. But when you're having a bad day and you're like, what am I doing? Or I can't do this, or why would they ever want me in that room? You go into that folder and you start to read kind of all of the impacts you've had on people. And I think that that can really shift your mindset out of that kind of fear and maybe scarcity into like, look at all the cool things I get to do. And I think the other piece of advice that I got was, if you're on a stage and you're speaking, I think a lot of people get nervous and they're like, oh my God, what if I screw up? But if you can make the speech or the conversation about how you're helping them and how you're able to actually serve them, I think that flips the narrative and takes the stress off of you. Because when you make it about them and not about you, it actually doesn't matter if you screw up one of your words because no one knows what you were going to say anyways.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's great advice.
Related to that, because it sounds like your business is very purpose driven. It sounds like financial empowerment, financial education for women. How does that influence, I guess, your entrepreneurial journey? Because I always hear things like, if you're doing it just for money, don't start a business. But then it's like I find like most people, when I think of entrepreneurs, it's like I think a lot of them are just doing it for money. But like, how does it, I don't know, how does that come into play with like, your journey?
Yeah, I don't know if I like that narrative. And I think it also plays into the narrative that, women specifically when they're in business need to become like not-for-profits. I think there's a lot of women-run businesses that end up becoming not-for-profits because for some reason in society, we've determined that we don't want women to be super successful in some of the businesses they run. We want them to be, heart-led. And I think that there's space for all of that. But I also think that you can do good and make a profit. And I think that you don't necessarily have to like give all of your wealth away because you're running a business. I don't think we expect that of, men that are entrepreneurs. I think that absolutely we shouldn't be expecting that of women. I will say, like, if you really don't love what you're doing and don't have a passion for it, it can be hard, absolutely, to get up and grind every day. As an entrepreneur, you're probably better off staying in the corporate space and trying to make as much money as you possibly can and then just retiring as early as you possibly can. Yeah. But if you are in business, I think at the end of the day, you're not just doing it out of the goodness of your heart. You need to make money because you have bills to pay. So I don't love that kind of piece of advice, but I think you definitely need to care about what you're doing as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like kind of, I guess, you have a bit of both probably.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. So I guess if you were to, forecast the end of your journey and like, you've retired, you've built your business, what would you want your impact to be? Like, what would you want people to say about like, I guess what your business did for the world or the impact they might have had on someone?
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that this is a very lofty goal, but I really hope that the wage gap and the wealth gap can get quite substantially smaller by the time I'm done with, financial education and policy work. Because I think, when we look at the global wealth gap, I think that there's still so much work to do. I would like to be kind of known for doing some of the work in that space and hopefully advocating and encouraging women to take control of their finances and build their own wealth. And then I think ultimately, hopefully they take that wealth, and I think this applies to men too, and reinvest it in, small businesses that don't typically get kind of that VC or angel investing money. We know that white women get 2.3% of VC funding, and women of color, I think, get 0.3%. So there's a lot of work to do there as well. And I think that would be an incredible impact to have.
Yeah. Great. And the last question would be, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about whether starting a business or creating anything? Is there anything you would say as someone who's, a few years in, I guess advice you would give to them?
I think you just have to go for it. I don't know if you know whether or not it will work out until you're actually kind of all in on it. It can be very easy, I think, from the sidelines to be like, oh, I don't know if that'll work, or I'm hopeful it'll work, but I'm not willing to kind of actually give it a shot. But I think if you carve out like, okay, I'm gonna go all in on this for 2 years and see, where that gets me. And I have the funds to do that, or I have a revenue stream that I know can bring me in enough money to cover those expenses. I think it's worth the gamble. I guess we'll see. I'm only 3 years into this, so we'll see if it was all worth the gamble. But I think at the end of the day, when you wake up and you're in the corporate space and you're like, wow, I really don't like what I'm doing. And I have women that reach out to me. I did a newsletter last week where I was asking, like, if you won the lottery or if you got $1 million tomorrow, would you still be doing the work that you're doing? And I had a lot of women respond saying like, no, I wouldn't. And I think that just speaks to like, we're in our jobs for like 40 to 50 hours a week. It's the thing we spend the most time doing per week.
Yeah.
And if you hate it and it's making you miserable, I think something has to change. And whether that's becoming an entrepreneur or not, life is way too short to be completely miserable. Whereas like, I think if I won the lottery, I mean, I'd probably take some time off, but I'd probably still end up yelling on the internet about women building wealth. Like, I think I would still show up and do the work that I'm doing, even if I was to come into a vast amount of money tomorrow. So I think when you can answer that question that like, yes, I would still be doing some of this work, I think that's when you know you're in the right space. And so how do you know until you get there is you kind of just have to go for it and try it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good litmus test of, would you do it? I think 99% of people would be like, hell no, I would definitely not keep doing this job. So,
the book, The Top 5 Regrets of Dying is, again, here's me with my nonfiction rambling, but it's a really interesting read. And I think when people get to the end of their life, they're never like, yeah, you know what? I wish I had worked more hours in corporate. I think if you can build a meaningful life that is impactful to you and your loved ones and is something that you actually enjoy, you're going to get to the end of your life eventually, and hopefully you'll be grateful for all of the choices you made. Because I think it would be so sad, I think, to get to the end of my life and be like, wow, I really hated 40 to 50 hours of my work week for 40 years of my life. And I think if we start to think about it that way, I think maybe it doesn't seem so scary to go into entrepreneurship. And I think the last thing I would say is, if you're going to bet on someone, I think you should bet on yourself, because you know how hard you're willing to work and you know how much you care about something. And I think people get this false sense of security that like corporate is so safe. But honestly, 15 minutes before this, I saw a headline that Amazon is laying off 30,000 people. And so I know I'm probably never going to fire myself. And so if I can create a business that has a consistent revenue stream that supports my lifestyle, I think there's actually much more financial safety in that than working in corporate.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. We want to give people a chance to find you. So what's the easiest way to find you online?
Yeah, I am on pretty much every platform on the internet at Janine Rogan, and you can find me on my website at that'swealthbuilding.com.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Janine. It was a pleasure chatting with you. I know I learned a lot, so we really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.